Welcome back to another episode of my series titled Card of the Day, where I showcase a random card from a random card company and give my take on the card. Today we have an iconic Yu-Gi-Oh card from the first starter deck I ever owned, that being starter deck Yugi. Now for this episode I wanted to do something a little different and show two versions of the same card and do a spot the difference, if you will. Today's card of the day is Dark Magician. On the left here is my original card I got in England when I was a kid, and on the right is the American version that I got at a local card shop just a couple of years back. Now, right off the bat, there's a significant condition difference, given one had to survive in the hands of a 6-year-old me, and the other lightly stayed in a sleeve for the past 20 years. The next obvious difference is that the European version has a different code, so the code for the European version is SDYE005, whereas the US version, as you see here, is SDY006. Now, the purpose of this code, if you don't know, is to identify what set the card is from, with the prefix, and what number it is in the set. So, in this case, SDY stands for Starter Deck Yugi, and the 5 or 6 here stands for where the card appears in the set list. Now, this E in front of the numbers does tend to be the case with all European cards, especially in older sets. But my question in this case was, why is the number different? You know, usually the numbers are identical and there's just that additional E to show that it's a European card. So I looked up the card lists for Starter Deck Yugi in both regions because I was kind of curious, and what I found was kind of interesting to me. I counted 4 extra cards that appeared in the American version. So in total, the European version has 46 cards in the set, and the American version has 50. The missing cards are Beaver Warrior, Mammoth Graveyard, Neo the Magic Swordsman, and Man-Eating Treasure Chest. Now, my question when I saw this was, why? Why did Europe not print those 4 extra commons in the set? I mean, they aren't necessarily game-changing, but Neo the Magic Swordsman was a pretty popular card back then. I mean, he was a 4-star, you could summon him straight away, he had 1700 attack, and he was also a spellcaster, so I know the game has completely developed nowadays, but back then that actually wasn't too bad. Well, it turns out the reason, and there wasn't really anything online specifically that said this, but I just kind of did a little bit of research, and I find out that it's because they were printed 6 months later in a completely different set. Now, that set that they appeared in was the famous Spell Ruler, which was the 3rd expansion released in the worldwide Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Now, interestingly enough, the European English version of this set had 27 additional cards versus the American set. This was to make up for the fact that these additional cards were excluded out of previous European sets. Those sets being the notorious Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, known as LOB, and Starter Deck Yugi as well. I don't know why, but I just thought this was really interesting. I just never saw a reason why the 5 and the 6 should be any different. And when you look it up, they basically just say, yep, European version had 46 cards, American version had 50, deal with it. And so I just wanted to kind of figure out why, because I just there was no real clear answer, but that's the reason why. Moving forward here, European and American cards have other distinct differences, that being the overall look. Now, the European cards tend to be much darker in the artwork, whereas the US cards tend to be much brighter. The text on the card differs as well, so the US cards tend to be, more bolder, they have bolder text and have a lighter background within the actual box. And I think because of that lighter background, this is what makes it sort of stand out a bit more, making it look more bold than the European text. And, you laugh, but that is quite a noticeable difference if you had both in your deck, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Players can be quite picky with what they've got. Sometimes you have to have, not sometimes, you normally have to have 3 versions of the same card, so if 2 out of the 3, the text looks a little off, you're gonna notice, and, that's a pretty big deal to Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. The holo patterns can look slightly different as well. It is a bit more obvious with the secret rares, but in those secret rares, the US cards tend to show more lines within the holos, whereas the European versions have much more glitter within the holo. There's not as many lines just going all in one direction. But even though these cards are ultra rares, to me, the purple seems very different. It's much darker, and the border of the overall card is much more faded in the European version versus the American version. Now, this card, the European version, has had to survive through some pretty harsh conditions for the past 20 years. Well, 20 years, when I was 6 to maybe 14, until we figured out what sleeves were. So, it could be a result of wear and tear, but, I still think there's a significant difference with the hollow bleed and overall colour of these two cards. For me, I personally really enjoy my American version. It's much mintier, so it does go well with my binder collection. But there's just something about the European version. It has all the nostalgic ties and history to it. Many a schoolyard duel was won with this bad boy back in the day. So, to me, that makes it a bit more top shelf worthy. And as a matter of fact, it will go back on display in my office after filming this. So, it's definitely a prized possession to me, regardless of, its condition, which is kind of going to be the theme with me when it comes to these old school cards. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say about these cards today. Let me know down below what you think about the European versus American cards, and maybe soon I'll find some better examples, like the secret rares I was talking about. I kind of just dropped that without having any examples, so maybe I'll find some and then make a video similar to this. Otherwise, until the next time, see you later.